95% of its activities are orphanages, schools, welfare programs. I'm not fronting for them. I don't even know them. I occasionally have met a few. I'm a secular Jewish existentialist. I have no theological overlap with the Hamas people. But when I have met with them, I have often found, and it's almost always been by accident, I have often found them to be extremely thoughtful, very articulate, extremely committed, far less corrupt than the PLO counterparts. And even the current situation, the bombings and the terrorism of the last couple of months. How many of you remember, or how many of you hear being told, that one of the reasons this is happening is the Israelis arrested the head of Hamas years ago. He's a blind sheikh who they hold in a prison in Tel Aviv, I think. We arrested the political head of Hamas a few months ago when he tried to re-enter the United States after years of living here. He's been living here, traveling, been a businessman. There are no charges against him. He's being held in New York City. There are no criminal charges against him. The only charge is that because new legislation was passed because of Jewish lobby pressures, Jewish-Israeli lobby pressures, one day when he tried to re-enter the United States, because he was now the political head of Hamas, the equivalent sort of Jerry Adams of the IRA, of Sinn Féin, he was arrested because the Israelis asked that he be arrested and want him to be deported to Israel. And this was before the recent terrorism. It's one of the reasons for the recent terrorism. We could go on and on about what's called the peace process. And I'm tempted to do so. But let me read you a couple of quotes from some of these people I've been mentioning and try to juxtapose the reality of these quotes to what you, as Americans living in West Virginia, have been told by your government and by your media. First is about the Gulf War. You've all been told that this was a war that we went to save the region, stabilize the region, protect the countries from aggression from Iraq. There are a lot of things you weren't told, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. When the Congress of the United States was debating whether to vote to approve of George Bush's use of American forces in the Gulf, and when there was anxiety that the Congress might not vote that way, a public relations firm was hired by the Kuwaitis. The public relations firm was headed by Jody Powell, the press secretary for former President Carter. And what happened? And this happened to you. It didn't happen just to the Congress of the United States. It happened to all of us. A woman was brought in front of the committee, and the woman described how she had witnessed that Iraqi troops had come into hospitals in Kuwait, had bayoneted babies, had thrown them out of incubators, had stolen all the equipment and taken all the equipment back to Iraq. The implication was very clear. The Iraqis are thugs. They're committing war crimes. We, the United States, have to go to the aid of the Kuwait as well. After the war, we found out the situation was a little different. Number one, they forgot to tell us during the congressional testimony that the woman who was sitting in front of the Congress of the United States, sitting in front of you, that's the equivalent of sitting in front of you, they're our representatives, happened to be the ambassador of Kuwait's daughter. Then they forgot to tell you that no, she wasn't in Kuwait after all. She was reading from a script prepared by her father's embassy and prepared by the public relations firm that had been hired for millions of dollars to propagandize the people of the United States. So here we have a situation where our own Congress, right in front of our eyes, literally right in front of our eyes, is manipulated and lied to. And it creates an impression in the society that we can't trust our officials, we can't trust our institutions, we can't trust our press. Now here's what Pierre Salinger says about that war. For those of you who do not know, but I suspect most of you in this room do know, Pierre Salinger was John Kennedy's press secretary and then headed up the ABC News Bureau in Paris. He's hardly a radical personality. He's very much an establishment insider. Here's what he says about the Gulf War, which incidentally, maybe a couple of hundred Americans were killed. But imagine this. Over 500,000 Iraqis were killed during the war. The country was devastated, pretty much pushed back 40 or 50 years. And since the war, 500,000 Iraqi children have died because of malnutrition, lack of medicine, of starvation, because of the sanctions imposed on Iraq after the war. Dear Salinger, the Gulf War was the most interesting piece of reporting that I did because it came out with a story that the press didn't tell the American people, that the Gulf War was absolutely unnecessary. I mean, it was a plot. George Bush decided he wanted a war, and George Bush decided to tell Saddam Hussein to go ahead and invade Kuwait. The interesting thing about this is that all of this is in a book that has been published in this country, except that not even 1% of the Americans even know that the book exists. And it's even more interesting because in Europe, this book has sold millions of copies. And in the U.S., it probably has sold 25,000 copies. But it explains all the things that went on before the war, and it explains to what extent the war was totally unnecessary. Come ahead a few years to what happened after the war. After the war, you'll remember there was a lot of anxiety. The United States government was worried about upheavals and tension in the countries of the Gulf and in the countries in other Middle East countries. So the Madrid peace process began. And within a few years, Yasser Arafat was converted from terrorist who was not welcome in the United States and could never come to Washington. Within days, we were told just the opposite. Now all of a sudden he's a great statesman. Now all of a sudden he's our ally. Now all of a sudden he comes to the White House. And the American people accept all this as if people change within a few days. Here's what Noam Chomsky at Harvard has said about that period and about Arafat and about why this happened. By 1993, and I'm quoting from a Chomsky lecture, Arafat was on the verge of being thrown out. The hatred and contempt for the PLO was extreme on the West Bank in those years. I remember that myself from wandering around West Bank villages and towns during the Intifada. People were saying, it's true that's all we got, but they're really a bunch of corrupt jerks and we need to get rid of them. By 1993, this was reaching a real flood, and there were open calls for throwing out Arafat and his clique of gangsters. At that point, apparently he realized, and certainly the Israelis realized, that this would be a good time to make an agreement with the PLO, the shadow of its former self, because now, to save a fragment of his former authority and power, he'll be our agent, kind of like the local Indian mercenaries in India who ran the place, or the Salvadoran military. And that's what basically happened. That's what we call the peace process. Well, so much for the quotes, and so much for the pointing out to you that things aren't what they seem, and an awful lot of extremely relevant information is kept from you. And there are reasons it's kept from you. It's not accidental. So what about what's been going on for the past few years? What about autonomy? And what about the agreements that have been signed in Oslo? Well, I have a magazine here. It's actually published in Israel, which will show you what autonomy is. You've been told, American people have been told, that a just and stable peace is being pursued. You've been told that the Palestinians are on the road to something that they find acceptable. What you haven't been told is that off the record, when he's not in front of the press cameras, Shimon Peres has privately told diplomats, the article appeared in the Village Voice, didn't appear in the New York Times, and here's a quote attributed to Peres when he thought he wasn't being overheard. We really screwed the Palestinians at Oslo. They'll never get a Palestinian state now. And sure enough, I'll show you the map of how they've been screwed. This is a map of the West Bank. This is the area that the UN for a decade, for 2 decades, has passed one Security Council resolution after another saying the Israelis need to do X and Y. Now you remember that when the Security Council was passing resolutions that we liked about Iraq, we endorsed the Security Council completely and insisted on international law and told everybody that the UN was fully behind us. Of course, resolution after resolution after resolution about the Arab-Israeli-Palestinian situation has been totally disregarded. And for a generation, the U.S. and Israel have voted one way in the General Assembly, usually about 150 to 2, everybody else in the world voting another way. All right, so here's the map of the West Bank. This is the area that supposedly the Palestinians are supposed to be pleased with the agreement that's been made. Well, first of all, the blue area, by far the biggest area, that's totally taken away from the Palestinians. Only the Israeli army and Israeli settlers are in charge in the whole blue area. So what about the white area? Well, at least the Palestinians get that, don't they? No, they don't. The Palestinians get about 10% of the white area. The white area actually shows the area of joint administration, which basically means the Israeli army is in charge, and the Palestinian police, who are paid for by your tax dollars and European money, work with the Israeli army. The only areas that the Palestinians get are the very black areas. Now, if this isn't the formula for reservations, if this isn't the formula for Bantustans, somebody come with another map and show me something that's more clear than this. So why are the Palestinians fighting? They're fighting because they know what's happening to them. They know they're being put on reservations. They know they're being lied to and deceived and tricked. They have no army to fight with. Most of them live in refugee camps outside of these areas. The Israelis won't let them come back. They know their leadership has been corrupted and twisted. They know that Yasser Arafat is being made into a client regime, just like the Hashemites in Jordan and the Al-Sauds in Saudi Arabia and the Al-Sabahs in Kuwait. They know what the process is. It's the old British divide and rule strategy. You get the local population fighting among itself. You play one faction and one leader off against another. And you create the conditions in world public opinion, which is now much more relevant than it has ever been before, in which your leaders can get up in front of their constituents and tell them X is real, when in fact Y is real. We could call it the big lie, but I actually don't want to take it that far because that's reserved for how the Nazis used propaganda. But there are, unfortunately, too many similarities, and I'm not going to shy away from saying that. Sometimes what's going on in the region can only be expressed in art and in poetry. And I have a number of poems from Israelis and Palestinians which are almost so shocking in their graphic detail that they cause people to come to tears. There are a few people from their background here, and I'm sure they know Ghassan Kanafani's poetry. But I'm not going to take the time, and I'm not a very good poet myself. And I'm also not a good entertainer. I don't know how to make jokes about this subject. All I know how to do is share with you the experiences that I've had, and the places that I've gone, and the people that I've met, and what I've learned to be reality versus what I would have thought to be reality if I had never had the opportunity to get to know the region and study the region and go there so many times. I know most of you have not had that opportunity, and maybe some of you think there's something wrong here. Brzezinski must have another agenda. He's not telling us the truth, or he wouldn't say these things. I don't have another agenda, and I don't have much power and influence, and I thank you for coming this evening. My name is not a name you heard before, and you may not hear it again. I'm not able to get in front of big American media anymore. When I represented the World Jewish Congress, I did go on the Donahue program. When I worked with establishment institutions like the Smithsonian and the National Geographic Society, I was part of the Washington power establishment. We got invited to the right cocktail parties and went to the right places. But once you speak out and take a stand that is not only so outspoken, but in my view, this is all I can tell you, in my view, honest, you're pushed out, and you need not to take it too personally, because far better people than myself have been pushed out, and I'll name just a couple. I doubt many of you in the audience know that there's a man in this country, a lawyer in this country, who has actually prosecuted the United States for war crimes in the Middle East. He actually brought international jurists from all over the world to New York, held a meeting that lasted 2 or 3 days, which thousands of people attended. He himself served as the prosecutor indicting the United States for war crimes in its Middle East policies. This all sounds kind of radical. Who the hell is this guy? And we never heard anything about this. Well, the man is a former Attorney General of the United States. Ramsey Clark's father was a Supreme Court Justice. Lyndon Johnson made Ramsey Clark the Attorney General of the United States. He resigned during the Vietnam period against Johnson's Vietnam policy. But a man of that stature has been saying and doing the things he's been saying and doing, and you've never been told. I was at the war crimes hearing that he held. I was fascinated by it. But it never appeared in American newspapers. There was no mention of it on the evening news. Nobody told you. Nobody told you about Pierre Sounder. Nobody tells you what Noam Chomsky is saying. Because I know what we're all reduced to. We're all reduced to turning on the evening news, seeing the sound bites, watching McNeil Lair. I guess it's just the Lair report now. And this is what passes for information, and this is what passes for informing the American people about the truths of the situation. Well, the truths of the situation are that the region is radicalizing, that there's more and more hostility, more and more hatred. We in this country have now had terrorism that we never had before. The World Trade Towers were bombed. There was a conspiracy apparently to bomb the tunnels. Pennsylvania Avenue's been closed. You can't drive by the White House anymore. The State Department and Congress are barricaded with huge things to prevent truck bombs. And this is only the beginning, because we're not dealing with just a few people in the Middle East. We're dealing with a huge civilization of 200-some million people with quite a history. And these people are not going to be willing to live in subjugation and to live in oppression and to live under the conditions that the United States empire, if you will, insists that they live under. Let me say just a word in closing. You've been very attentive, but I can't tell if the serious faces are going to result in questions or if people are going to get up and challenge what I said. One doesn't know how to share with you the depth of the feelings that are growing in the Middle East, the depth of the hostility and the depth of the hatred. I'll tell you one or two stories from my own personal experience. I was in Egypt about 10 years ago. I've been to Egypt many, many times. And I had met a businessman. And I have an interest in computers. And for 2 or 3 weeks, he's an MIT graduate, speaks perfect English, wears business suits just like us. Went back to Egypt after getting his PhD in computer sciences. And one day, after we'd known each other a few weeks, he asked me if I'd have a drink with him this evening. Well, he's not Islamic. We went over to the Shepherd Hotel and he ordered some beer. And we sit down and he looks me in the eye and he says, I wanted to speak to you and I haven't known if it was all right if we talk about what's happening in the Middle East. And I said, I've been waiting for you to offer me the chance. And he said, without further ado, do you know how much hatred there is in Egypt now for the Americans? This didn't come from Islamic militant. This came from a man whose very personal welfare is determined by how good the economy of Egypt is and how good relations between computer companies in the U.S. and his company are. But after a while, he just felt he had to say something. After a while, he wanted to get something off his chest. After a while, he wanted to stop pretending that there wasn't this huge, terrible problem between me as an American and him as an Egyptian. And Marilyn's heard the story of Lena before, and she's read it because I've written it up. I'll conclude with that. And with one other quote. Here's what a sheikh in Gaza said after the January Israeli killing of the engineer, the person who was supposedly responsible for some of the earlier bombings. He said, there is blood in our mouths which we want to spit in the face of this unjust world. And that's exactly what then happened. And the Israelis knew it would happen. Shimon Peres can smile and pretend all he wants. but he knew exactly what was going to be the result of breaking the informal ceasefire and killing Yahya Ayash in Gaza under supposedly Palestinian protection. Now the little story about Lena, because the little story about Lena had a great effect on me, and that's when I decided some of us who are American Jews needed to speak up and couldn't any longer let the official spokesman of the organized Jewish community speak for us. It just so happened that when the Palestinian Intifada broke out in December of 87, I happened to have a Pan Am World Pass. Pan Am said, if you've earned these 30-day passes, you have to use them. So the last month you could use them, and I had earned, with all my travel, this top award, 30 days, go to the airport, go anywhere in the world you want for 30 days. And I had promised myself I would go everywhere but the Middle East. After all, that's why I earned the pass in the first place. So I went down to Argentina and Chile and visited friends. Then the Intifada broke out, the Palestinian uprising, and I said, great, I couldn't have done this without this pass, but I'm going to Palestine tomorrow, and I'm going to go to a refugee camp, and I'm going to stay there for 3 or 4 days, and then I'm coming home, and I'm not going to see my Israeli friends, and I'm going to take advantage of this pass. So I went. And I wasn't prepared for the effect it had on me, because I've been to refugee camps many, many, many times. But I've been there for a few hours. I've been there for coffee. I've been there to sit around and have something to eat, which isn't much. This time I checked in. I stayed with them. And I felt what it meant to be a refugee, and I felt what it meant to fear the Israeli army in the evening, and I felt what it meant on a human level to be with these people. And then the last night, I went to Bethlehem, where I met Lena. And in Bethlehem, I needed to go there. You don't get taxis to refugee camps early in the morning to go to the airport. And I was introduced to this adorable girl, just absolutely adorable, 3 years old, Palestinian girl. And she was laughing her head off. Oh my God, what fun. He's taking video pictures. He's American. He speaks his funny language. She was having the time of her life. This went on for at least a half hour. Until her father called her beyond anything she can understand. And she runs it through her head for 5 or 10 seconds. And then she finally decides, obviously this is my interpretation, she decides it has to be a joke. It cannot be true. He cannot be Jewish. He couldn't be in our house. Couldn't be a friend of my father's, so it's got to be a joke. So she starts laughing. And then her father explains to her that it's not a joke, that Mark is a Jew, and that it's important for you to understand, Lena, that there are good Jews and bad Jews, just like good Jews, good Palestinians, bad Palestinians, that sometimes a Jewish person can be a friend of ours. And again, she goes into this little stare about, like a computer searching for the connection. How do you make a correlation between good and Jew, friend, home? It wasn't there. The 3-year-old girl just was unable to make the associations. So she finally, in defiance of her entire family, and this is the generation of the next Palestinian generation, she comes over to me, stares me down, starts hitting me, orders the camera off, which she had ordered the moment she saw the red light going off before. She ordered the camera always on. Now, off. Starts screaming that there's a Jew in the house. He has to leave. She doesn't want to talk to him anymore. I don't know if I can convey to you the human, emotional connotations of this kind of exchange. When you look at the future and you see that on both sides of the line, people are growing up with such hate and such hostility because they cannot believe that someone from the other side can actually be their friend, can actually be other than the oppressor. Now, I've had these experiences, you haven't. You've been good enough not only to invite me, but to politely listen to me, and thank you very much for doing so. But I think the main benefit to yourselves and to me as well.
I'm Mark Brzezinski, your host for this weekly program, Mideast Realities. If you too are concerned about the situation in today's Middle East and about U.S. policies toward that crucial region of the world, and if you'd like to meet like-minded persons, why don't you come to one of our weekly social meetings? I'll be there, of course. Just give us a call.